Welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Maria del Mar Saez and I'm a product manager at Cytognos. Today I'm very happy to present our invited speaker Carlos Maria Fernández, who is going to talk about the added value of a screening step in flow cytometry, much more than a single tube. Carlos Maria Fernández is a medical doctor and specialist in clinical chemistry, with a PhD in medicine focused on the myeloid hematopoiesis and mechanisms involved in the clonal malignant transformation. He has spent a year as a fellow at the Children's Medical Center in Cincinnati, Ohio, under the direction of Mark Rothenberg. This work focused on eosinophil disorders in basic and clinical research. Since 2005, he coordinates and leads the flow cytometry educational program at the Flow Cytometry Core, University of Salamanca, helping more than 2,000 people, from technicians, medical doctors, residents, and hematology physicians to head of departments, to develop their skills in the diagnosis of hematological diseases using flow cytometry. From 2018, he leads the Diploma of Specialization in Flow Cytometry for the diagnosis and monitoring of hematological malignancies and primary immunodeficiencies. Thank you very much, Carlos, for sharing this time with us today.
Good morning. Thank you for attending this seminar. I want to thank especially to Cytognos for the kind invitation and for sharing this time with you. One question. Have you ever think about how many decisions we have to do every day in our lives? Probably, if you don't realize that, we are doing decisions every time. Every time we do something, we are choosing between A, B, C option. In the diagnosis is similar. The point is that sometimes the decision means to take a specific road, but not always the road is well selected. For that reason, we create screening tubes. Screening tubes are tubes or options from clinical point of view that help us for choosing the best way, as you will see. So we are in the crossroad and we have to think where is the best place to go. No matters the age, no matters the position, no matters the sex we have. So the point is how to choose properly the best, because the limit between the failure and success not always is very far away. Sometimes it's a very thin lineage, that difference from failure to success. Then we have to choose properly, because in medicine a bad decision could point to disaster or could go to life, and we want to choose always life. In terms of diseases, we know that the semiology that the patient can show is very heterogeneous, and the causes of this are a lot. So many different situations can provoke the similar semiology. Even when we have clonal or not clonal, the nature of the cell and the stage of the cell, even being different, could provoke the same semiology. So it's very important to choose properly, because we are in the crossroad and we have to go to a specific road, front or the other road, just to finish the diagnosis. So at this moment, when we have to select, when we have to choose, it's very, very important to know, to come with the best tools for doing the proper decision. So what we have to do is just to create a system, tubes, combinations able to orientate properly. So we have to try to scratch and to go in depth to all the possibilities just for distinguishing what we have. because otherwise we are losing time, we are losing money, we are losing resources, and the most important thing, the patient could be not well diagnosed. In consequence, could have a very bad fate. So what we have to do is just to design a system just to be able to create good screening tubes. Systems to create good decisions. In that terms, these tubes, these combinations, should be done taking in account all the possibilities we have to have in front of us. For that reason, Euroflow many years ago had this kind of vision. They realized that they have to be just very close to the clinician, very close to the doctor that is in charge of doing finally the treatment of the patients based on a good diagnosis. Then, for that reason, the main word of this work was the standardization, starting by the clinician, understanding their needs. Then, when we hear them and then when we listen to them and we realize what they need, all the process for the standardization should be done, knowing which were the techniques that should be used and developing the best panels that should be efficient and reproducible just to be used in different laboratories, different countries, different systems, and then to be able to have mechanisms to analyze the huge quantity of data that could be produced, especially in multiparametric flow cytometry. Understanding this, having systems, methodologies to analyze properly all the results, not only store but analyzing, just to extract the information much better, just to give the proper answers to the main questions, and even arising new questions, analyzing properly the big data that we had. So that was crucial for the new generation flow we are working with nowadays. Just understanding that everything should be done according to the evidence, according to the standardization, and using the best technology that we may have in our hands, as you will see in this seminar. So, using this standardization process, finally, we were much more credible because the result that was created in one lab was similar in other lab in other part of the world, and this was essential for the credibility and for our own security and security of the patients. The assessment of the clonality, the assessments of the proper diagnosis in one lab and other lab using the same technology was crucial and should be crucial for using this technology in the proper way. Of course, it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and we have to be aware of that, because this is crucial. If tomorrow I want to design my own panel, the own panel that I can design should be tested not only once but twice, 3 times, 4 times, and to be comparable. And this takes a lot of time, a lot of money. So this effort was already done. And here you will see this morning the results of that. Because in hematology we have to distinguish between different situations and again could have the same semiology. Clonal, no clonal, acute, chronic diseases, etc. And all of us should be pointing to the same direction. So Euroflow, as you probably know, design and algorithms and the flow chart to work based on the clinical questions, and then in one first step the orientation, the crossroad where we are, which is the best option to choose according to the analysis of a global vision of the disease, and then the characterization based on the results that we had in the screening tubes. And which are these screening tubes? This morning I want to to be focused in ALOT and I want to be focused in LST, just to think, to discuss with you about the utility of them, the good and the bad things that could be there. Then, according to the ALOT tube is designed when we want to address the main question, acute leukemia. I have acute leukemia based on signs or symptoms, and then I have to categorize. Then, according to that, the ALOT tube, and according to the experience, this tube is useful in terms of accuracy in almost 100%. So this tube allows to answer the main question. I have blasts and these blasts are committed to a specific lineage. The lineage assessment is the main question, but it's not the only question we can solve with this tube. Then, in the diagnosis approaching, of course, the main question is the lineage. So, whether the lineage is the main question, we have to be able to distinguish between the myeloid, B lymphoid, T lymphoid, TCP, BCP cell. And according to that, we use the recommendation, the international recommendation according to the LGL that proposed the lineage assessment according to specific markers. And according to that, the Euroflow developed this ALOT tube. This ALOT tube that was designed just to identify properly from the very early beginning the lineage, the commitment of the cells. Then we were able to distinguish whether the cell, the leukemic stem cell, is committed to T cell precursor or to B cell precursor or to NK cell precursor using the most immature marker that appears in the normal differentiation of the cells. Also, in the same lineage, in the AML, we were able with these markers to say this is not T, this is not B, and this is immature because of CD34, because of CD45, probably this is our myeloid, or even this is before myeloid. This is like, or this could be like hematopoietic stem cell leukemia, or precursor that is involved in the disease. But at least no T no B means we are in this part. So with this orientation, we understand that the tube orientates us to be focused where the leukemic stem cell is arising. But also we have more information here because also the analysis of the maturing cells provide us a vision, wide vision about the residual hematopoiesis, what is going on, whether the distribution between lymphoid cells and myeloid cells is normal or not, or the distribution between the T and K B cell ratio is normal or not, because we may have hidden clonal B cells, mature B cells, or clonal T cells, or clonal NK cells. So if we don't analyze the normal rates, probably we are not focusing on what is going on there. Because maybe the problem, think about that, we have symptoms, signs that aplasia, for instance, could be because I have in the hematopoietic niche increasement of the immature cells, blast, or increasement of clonal mature cells. So we have to pay attention. How is the normal distribution? How is the distribution in this part? It's very important also. In case we don't have, we cannot distinguish CD34 compartment or we don't see the blasts. So this is important. Then also we can see something related to no normal phenotypes in residual hematopoiesis, especially in the CD34 compartment or in the neutrophils, where we can see features related to dysplasia, thanks to the analysis of MPO and also analysis of the expression of 1979A and CD7 in the CD34 compartment, in which we can see whether this compartment is working properly with these patterns or not. If not, the overexpression of CD7 and the lack of this 1979A is revealing that we are having problems with the normal CD34 differentiation, in other words, with the origin of the hematopoiesis. And if we have these plastic features here, probably we are talking about some MTS underlying this possibility. Together with the neutrophils, so on this line, the neutrophils also allows us the analysis of MPO together with 45 and four-side scatter and complexity provides information that should be also detected by morphology based on the complexity of the cells, the granularity in morphology, and so on, the analysis of CD45 and the intensity of MPO. The range of the MPO is talking about the maturation of the neutrophils. So it's important, could be important just to define, to identify these dysplastic features. Together with that, the analysis in depth, if the blasts could arise or could provide information about the abnormal expressions of some markers that could be related to genetic aberrancies, useful for the prognosis, useful for the classifications related to some categories, as you can see here, 19 expressions CD7 related to some specific alterations, genetic alterations, and in the eosinophils, in case we have eosinophilia in the context of AML, we can also analyze the eosinophils, and if they show MPO, probably we could have to rule out. We have to demonstrate by molecular analysis, molecular biology, the presence of inversion of 16 chromosome related to good prognosis at the beginning. And together with that, other markers like CD7, that is not important also for the assessment of the T NK cells, but also the expression of CD7 is very important just for identifying other cells or other lineages that could be part of the blasts, as dendritic cells and megakaryocytic cells. So this marker is very useful. Then, in summary for this ALOT approaching, what we have to say is that we have to use ALOT because we have many advantages. Of course, we can use probably the bone marrow is the most efficient, but also we can use ALOT in the peripheral blood because, of course, in peripheral blood, no precursors should be identified, or at least we have mature cells in the circulation, but we shouldn't have immature cells. So the identification of the blasts in peripheral blood normally is easy because in normal conditions we have very few quantity of CD34 circulating cells. And in the bone marrow, what happens is that we may have in normal conditions CD34, in other words, precursors, but the way they are doing maturation could be related to normal or not in case of dysplasia, but in case of acute leukemia, it's very important to assess the lineage, and the ALOT tube allows us that. So we can assess the lineage of that based on those specific markers that are very canonical for this BT and, let's say, myeloid in terms of MPO. But remember, if you have immature cells with CD45 and they are not B, they are not T, they have to be myeloid, just by discard. And if they have MPO, they could be neutral mono, and if not, they could be related to other lineages like basophils, eosinophils, erythroid cells, megakaryocytic cells, dendritic cells, mast cells. So for that reason, in this tube, we have much more sensitivity for assessment the B T lineage, and the myeloid lineage is based on ruling out B, ruling out T, showing or not MPO, that doesn't matter. And then also, after the assessment of the lineage, it's important just at least for starting, for thinking about all the possibilities, like dysplasia. Maybe you have no blasts, the patient shows a very bad condition and fit, and then the dysplasia could be the cause of that. So analysis of the CD34, even checking the MPO 19 CD7 is important, or also the relationship between the T, B, and K cell could be showing, or could be show us that we have these regulations of these patterns because we have increasement of clonal mature T or B or NK cells. So don't forget to check the proportions, and also the presence of a negative population in CD45 showing CD19 could be just pointing that maybe we have multiple myeloma. So depending on the question, depending on the clinical situation, depending on the information that we can get, we can be much more orientated, or we have to think about these possibilities. Of course, the less information we have, and if you have very low infiltration of multiple myeloma cells, probably we are not able to check that in the ALOT tube, unless the infiltration is very big. And then, of course, in this tube we have markers that could be related in the blast with the prognosis, S19, CD7, MPO in specific blasts. So, if we pay attention in the analysis of this tube, we could have advantages, and we can save money, we can save time, and we can just to be focused on the main question and ruling out other possibilities. What about LST? When we have LST, when we go to the LST, is because normally we have something related to lymphocytosis, or we have something related sometimes with aplasia. That is important. So depending on the clinical phase, depending on the clinical picture, depending on many different situations, sometimes the question is lymphocytosis, sometimes the question is based on the morphology, sometimes the question is related to infections, whatever. So for that reason, pay attention to the clinical questions in case you have that information. But mainly, we go to this when we are thinking about something that the main character is the lymphocytic population, the mature lymphocytic population. Then the main question is to distinguish between clonal versus no clonal, clonal versus reactive. According to that, and when we have studied properly this, we are able to say if this is reactive, we stop here because we have high sensitivity, high probabilities of not having something related at least with the clinical picture. Maybe we can have very small clones, but probably in that case they couldn't be related to the clinical. But of course, depends on the sample that we have, depends of many situations. For that reason, the final diagnosis is not only based, it couldn't be based only on flow cytometry, but the raw analysis of the LST is providing us the chance of distinguishing between clonal or not clonal. Then, when we decide that we have signs of clonality, then we can go more specifically for different categories. Then it's important to understand that LST is important, is crucial, because the chronic lymphoproliferative disorders comprise almost 70 categories. So it's important to the clinicians to understand much better the pathophysiology. We have many different categories, so the orientation is crucial just for not wasting a lot of time, a lot of money, just going in the wrong direction. Also, it's important for doing a much better differential diagnosis, TB, TNK, So not always is easy, especially when we are focused on morphology. So we see the morphology first, and then we have to decide this is B, this is T. By morphology, we cannot distinguish that. So screening tube is essential because at least for B we have CD34, we have 34 different categories, and for T and K cells we have almost 30 categories, or a little bit more than 30 categories. So it's very important just to be focused from the beginning to choose the best direction, and then understanding that even when the subcategorization, the split in the different categories is well done, the difference in the prognosis of different diseases is nothing to do. We have very mild categories and very aggressive categories. So it's important just to have from the beginning important markers, good markers for doing this categorization between something that might be aggressive or might be mild. And then also this provides or could be able to make, in our sense, new questions. Why this patient with this final diagnosis has a different behavior when the diagnosis is the same? So they need, the clinicians have to know much better what is going on in some category that seems to be similar in one patient and another patient. So the analysis, as you will see, the very well done analysis in this sense could help us just for understanding, for distinguishing markers that could make the difference even within the same category. And then also it's important for them to know whether we have markers that can provide them information about the future, about the fate, about the prognosis of the disease. So all of these things could be, or part of this, could be just addressed in the LST. Because again, we have to distinguish between clonal or not clonal, acute or chronic diseases. In terms of clonality, it's very clear that the most informative about the vast majority of the information about clonality, the much more accuracy about clonality in lymphoid cells is related to B cells, not to T cells, not to NK cells. The assessment of clonality in T and K cells is nothing to do with flow. Flow can orientate, but never to assign clonality, because sometimes we have no specific markers for doing this assessment. But of course, in the LST, we have markers in terms of NK cells, in terms of T cells, just for suspicion of clonality. In terms of NK cells, the aberrancies in the expression of 56, CD8 mainly, and then the abnormal expression in CD5, CD4 compared to normal can orientate about the possibility of clonality. But what we know nowadays, unfortunately, it is for NK cells with this combination LST, the most likely marker of clonality is the increasement of the cells, the proportion of the cells compared to the nucleated cells. So more than 10% of NK cells with a aberrant phenotype is much more related to clonality. But when we have very low numbers of NK cells, even when they have abnormal phenotypes, we have no high sensitivity for demonstrating clonality. So this is something that we have to deal with, and this is one of the things that the LST cannot solve. According to T, we have also some similar. The presence, the suspicion of clonality is based on ratios the distribution of CD4, CD8, the ratio distribution, normally is one of the parameters that is used. But of course, this distribution, this ratio depends on the sample we are dealing. You know, for instance, in the peripheral blood, the ratio between CD4 CD8 is 2 CD4 per 1 CD8. But in bone marrow could be equal or a little bit more CD8 than CD4. But also in lymph nodes, we have four more times CD4 than CD8. In spinal fluid is something similar. But in case of normality, because what about if you have immunodeficiency? So the things may change. So the ratio is dangerous for the assessment of clonality. For that reason, we need to combine with other possibilities, with other things. Then the abnormal phenotypes combined with the ratio can orientate much better, much more accuracy. And the markers normally we are looking at is the CD3, CD5, because in normal conditions these markers are quite homogeneous, strong and homogeneous. So the lack of these markers can orientate to the possibility of the presence of clonality of part of the cells that could have, or within the T cells, we may have some clonal cells hidden among the normal ones. That we have to combine more than one marker, CD3, CD5, the intensity in CD4, CD8, and sometimes, very important, the CD56. 56 also could be related to reactivity in CD4. So the expression of CD56 in CD4, CD8 simultaneously could be a sign of reactivity. But the presence of homogeneous expression of CD56 in one specific subclone of CD8 or CD4 could be related to the presence of clonality. But again, could be. Maybe in the very next feature, the presence of this marker, TRBC1, could be or could change this spectrum. But nowadays, the LST provides this, is the limitation. We can have suspicion or high suspicion, but not the confirmation of clonality. And then finally, for the B cells, we have the of course, the most available situation, because in the B cell, what we combine is the kappa-lambda ratio together, of course, with abnormal phenotypes, because the same that happens with CD4, CD8 happens with kappa-lambda. Kappa-lambda is a ratio. So if we have 1% of abnormal B cells among 99% of normal B cells, even when they have kappa or lambda restriction, the ratio is not affected. Or when you have two clones, one kappa and one lambda, 50-50, the ratio is similar like the normal. So for that reason, the ratio is not enough and we have to combine with other markers. In these terms, these markers are crucial, like 19, CD20, for ruling out some categories. For instance, the presence of high intensity in CD20 normally rule out the possibility of CLL. The high intensity in CD19 normally rules out the possibility of follicular lymphoma in general. CD5, the presence of CD5, homogeneous CD5, points much more to CLL and mantle cell lymphoma than other categories. The intensity in CD38 could be related also with Burkitt lymphoma. The Burkitt lymphoma, we know that the intensity of this marker is like the B cell precursors, is like the monocytes, is like the NK cells. So the intensity also points to specific categories, just not only for the clonality, but also just for the subcategorization. For that reason, and also the 45, the DIM expression in CD45, even being strong, is pointing probably to CLL, to mantle cell lymphoma, to pre-germinal centers. So as you see, the combination of kappa lambda together with aberrant phenotypes different from normal points to specific categories. Then, as I was talking, the utility using algorithms in order to filter the information provides us a very high sensitivity and very high confidence. So, looking at the size, very important, very cheap, because we have not to pay any marker just for saying you are large or you are small. Just comparing with the rest of the cells that we have, point whether the cell is compatible, the lymphoma, in case they are clonal, is compatible with small lymphoma or large lymphoma. And then together with that, we have different categories according to the utility, then the use of this, the accumulation of data related to pointing to this, using them. These combinations, size together with 19, together with 20, together with CD5, this multi-parametric approaching provides us much more accuracy just to say this is this category or this is pointing to other different category. And specifically, those cases that show a small cell with normal 19, CD20, CD5 positive, sometimes this is the only category that is not properly well classified in the small lymphomas with LST, because we have to do differential diagnosis between mantle cell lymphoma and the other categories, MALT, lymphoplasmacytic marginal zone lymphoma. But different from this, we can almost classify classify the different categories, CLR or follicular lymphoma or mantle cell lymphoma, or lymphoplasmacytic or marginal zone lymphoma. In terms of large cells, using the LST, we can distinguish between hairy cell leukemia or no hairy cell leukemia because of the overexpression of both 19CD20. And then, unfortunately, the next question we have to address is whether the large B-cell lymphoma is coming from germinal center or out of germinal center. Because if this is coming from germinal center, we have to do the differentiation. We have to differentiate between Burkitt lymphoma and not Burkitt lymphoma because of the management of the patient. But in general terms, the precision that we have in terms of the diagnosis and subcategorization of the B-cell lymphomas is more than 90% using only the LST. And if we want to have much more accuracy, we have to go to the first tube, LST plus CD10, just in order to solve the question about the large B-cell lymphomas for distinguishing between Burkitt and germinal center different from Burkitt. Also, let's say double hit, triple hit, etc. So this combination is very good. And as I said, for T, unfortunately, we use nowadays other combinations different than the LST. And for NK cells, the studies that we did demonstrated or revealed that the most informative markers for distinguishing clonal versus not clonal, or at least for having much more suspicion of clonality, are 56, 67, Francine, Perforan, 94, HLA-DR, and these markers, unfortunately, but 56 are not in the LST. Also because with 8 colors, we couldn't address all the possibilities, and the frequency of the clonal NK cells is too low just to include these markers in one 8 color tubes combination. And as I said, according to the establishment of the clonality, then we can try in next steps to solve specific questions, whether this is much more this category or other categories, because the tubes are just designed to solve specific questions. So we can save time, money, resources, just because the LST is pointing out which categories should be. And according to that, we can develop specific algorithms in order just to isolate, to filter the most likely category we are dealing with in terms of small cells or large cells according to the normal expression or not normal expression of CD19, CD20, and according to the CD5. So this is a very important pathway to follow in terms of the correct analysis of this LST plus the panel. And according to that, also we can distinguish between the small cells and the large cells. And in the large cell lymphomas, also using this information, we can have just not only the diagnosis that is large B-cell lymphoma, but also we can address or we can check the story of the lymphoma, because the large lymphoma comes from small lymphoma. So we can check what was going on with how the disease started and how the disease had evolution, because that could be important for future treatments in the patients. And together with the clonality assessment, also we can analyze the microenvironment according to some different markers that are in the LST that provides us a lot of information, useful information, as C38, 45, 66, and the combination with 4 and 45. Because the presence of these allows to distinguish specific cells, let's say not clonal, or let's say non-lymphocytic cells, but other cells that could be involved in diseases. For instance, we can identify the plasma cells, and because of normal or abnormal phenotyping, we can distinguish whether they are clonal, whether this is much closer to multiple myeloma or Waldenström macroglobulinemia. So according to that, also we can describe, we can detect the presence of precursors and other cells that could be important just for, and that we could check if necessary. Then 45 is important in terms for the global identification as well as maturing analysis and analysis of maturing cells in case of bone marrow. 56 allows us to distinguish these plastic features, especially in monocytes and neutrophils. And the combination CD4, 45, 56 allows us to distinguish plasmacytoid dendritic cells that sometimes they are clonal, so the detection of these cells according to this combination also could be at least attractive. For that reason, in summary, what we can say is that LST tube is a very nice tube with a tons of information, tons of data that we have there. Normally, we use that thinking about lymphocytic cells, clonal lymphoid cells. One of the things we have to do is just to the first question, probably clonal versus no clonal, clonal versus reactive. Then the first thing is just to isolate the specific cells, T, B, NK cells, neutrophils if possible, monocytes, eosinophils, just to having very important internal controls and suspicion population, and then just to analyze step by step, lineage by lineage, B clonality, T suspicion of clonality, or NK suspicion of clonality. And in case of suspicion of assessment of B clonality, also the categorization is possible in the vast majority of the cases based on the size or on the size of the cells, but also based on CD19, based on CD20, based on CD5, even based on CD38. So at least the orientation. And together with that, also if we have blood, or we have bone marrow, or we have other tissues, if we find neutrophils or monocytes with abnormal phenotype, this is because they could be clonal or dysplastic, so we have to think about the presence of dysplasia just there. And also the utility of the use of properly of C38 can reveal the presence of plasma cells And whether the phenotype is not normal, we have to think about the possibility of the clonality, clonal plasma cells. So think about multiple myeloma infiltration or MGAS or somehow, and also the increasement of the cells like eosinophils, basophils, even monocytes could be underlying the possibility of myeloid I would say that chronic myeloid diseases, myeloproliferative neoplasms that also could be detected at least as a first time just because of the increasement of these cells. And then, of course, the lack of B, T, and K cells in different proportions could be just pointing about the possibility of having primary immunodeficiency based on severe or non-severe combined immunodeficiency or other kind of deficiencies. Of course, other specific tubes could be developed just for addressing all the possibilities as PDOT tube. And then, of course, this strategy allows us to saving, again, time, money, and resources, and just to point to choose the best option to follow the diagnosis. So, in other words, what we have is that we have a very powerful tool that is flow cytometry, in which the screening tubes have to address all the possibilities, because if the tube is not properly well done, maybe we are just focused on a specific route, but not all the routes that we have under the tree. And remember, we may have the same symptoms, the same signs, the same semiology, but coming from different places. Clonal, no clonal, mature, immature. If we are not able to explore all the possibilities, maybe we could be lost, and the most important, the patient would be lost. Because of that, the next step is just to understand that the best use of this, especially the LSG, is when we analyze all the cells that we have, just to say you are normal, you are normal, you are normal, or you are normal, or you are clonal, or you have signs of clonality, but also you are increased numbers, or you are under normal limits. So in other words, sometimes we have to pay attention about the microenvironment, because even when the clonal cells are clonal, we have to rule out the possibility that you can have other also together two different diseases or two different circumstances. The main question, because the patient went to the physician, but together with that we can have also other situation that could be clonal. So this is important. So if we don't address all the cells, if we don't waste time, or if we don't try to invest time identifying cells, we are losing a lot of information. Then we realize when we did the comparison with normal, and when we did the comparison with normal and we developed automatic analysis databases, we realize the utility of this tool, because this tool allows us to have a global vision of all the cells, not only the particular suspicion cells, but everything. So the aberrant cells and the microenvironment for one in this part, and also having normal rates distributed per age in different range of age allows us to identify situations in which you may have eosinophilia or eosinopenia or monocytopenia or monocytosis out of the normal range of the age. in the patient, even when the patient has lymphoma or has other different clonal disease. And sometimes this could be important or not. For instance, one example, a very quick example. In the NK cells, when they are clonal, we saw that typically the clonal expansion, the expansion of clonal NK cells, sometimes were together with total decrease of eosinophils, so eosinopenia, total eosinopenia. So we have clonal NK cells with no eosinophils. Who cares eosinophils? You know that by flow they are not very popular because of different issues that all we know. So the point was that when we tried to ask this new question, because this was new question, why some patients have with NK expansion have no eosinophils and others have eosinophils. Is this something important or not, or this is by chance? Okay, what we saw is that analyzing those patients with NK expansion, clonal expansion, and with no eosinophils, they had worse prognosis than patients that had eosinophils. And analyzing the genotype, we saw that the patient with no eosinophils had STAT3 mutations that is related to bad prognosis. In other words, the eosinopenia in these clonal NK expansions, could be related to specific molecular targeting in order to understanding the fate of these patients, or at least just to demonstrate clonality. And this is only one example, but we have many different situations that we have to analyze properly. So we can do that when we compare with normal. And Maria Roth was able just to show these benefits of the benefits of this analysis. And I recommend just to check this seminar because it was fantastic. And of course, this is topic for new seminars. Just how to use the automatic analysis, how to take the information about automatic analysis, because again, when you have clonal disease and you have 20 samples one day, and the question is this CLL yes or not? By LST, you can demonstrate yes, it's compatible with CLL or is not. But if the CLL is only 2, 3, 4%, normally, if we are in a hurry, we don't analyze anymore the rest of the compartments. And maybe in the rest of the compartments, we have critical information that could be useful for the clinicians, useful for the patient. For that reason, the analysis and the automatic analysis obligates us to check all the populations. This is crucial. And in this direction, we have this patient. This is a very short example that happened. We had LST, we had ALOT, we had long experience using this, and this represents a patient that we had, 14 years old, like the model that we have in the screen, and she came because of suspicion of BCP ALL, because of the picture, the clinical, the pancytopenia, whatever. They sent us peripheral blood, they sent us just only peripheral blood for ruling out the possibility of acute leukemia. So in the ALOT, we had no blasts. We didn't see any CD34, the CD45 was very clear, so we thought everything was okay, no blasts. We went to the LST. In the LST, also in the report, they said that this patient had specifically like reactive lymphocytes. So we went to the lymphocytic area because they were asking for that. Then the lymphocytic area was very nice. The T normal T distribution, normal B distribution, kappa lambda ratio fantastic, no CD5, NK cells very very low numbers with 56 normal, heterogeneity in CD8, nothing pointing about suspicion. And that day we had 30 samples, so we addressed the clinical questions. BCP-ALL or acute leukemia? No. Abnormal lymphocytes? No, because everything was normal. Okay. Then we decided to finish, to conclude to those questions, to say everything was like normal. Okay. 3 months later, this patient, the bone marrow of this patient came again, and in the ALOT tube we saw the presence of 40% of blasts. How were these blasts? The blasts were CD34 negative, 45 strong, 4-site scatter like monocytes. Okay. Then we went back to the previous study 3 months before, and those cells were detected in peripheral blood, in the LST tube, in the ALOT tube. That those cells were like monocytes, and we didn't pay attention about the monocytes. Unfortunately, this patient had acute monoblastic leukemia with KMTA2 or MLL rearrangement. Okay, this patient was very bad condition, and the fate of this patient, unfortunately, was very bad. Then the conclusion is why we weren't able to see that. What would happen if we would have done a very good diagnosis? Why didn't we check all the populations? Because looking at that population, that population that we had, the monocytic population was not normal, even in the LST. The 45 was not so brilliant like expected. The 4-site scatter was not so high. So the point is that those cells were there, but we didn't realize that this could be abnormal because this was AML, and the clinical question was ALL, BCP ALL. We were focused on that question, but we didn't address all the possibilities. What about, or what would happen if we could then realize, we would done properly the automatic analysis. In the automatic analysis, for sure, those cells, what we did retrospectively, the analysis, the automatic analysis said these cells are not normal, seem like monocytes, but with signs of immaturity. These are not normal. So what I want to show you, very humble, is that even when we believe that we have the knowledge of everything and that we are very brave doing flow cytometry, we have tons of data that we normally don't analyze, even when we have the LST or we have the ALOT, because we are focused specifically in one direction. If you remember that, we are in that direction. We are in the direction of just pointing to one specific pathway because the clinician says that this is the most likely, that we didn't explore something that we had to, and this has consequences. Probably we couldn't save the patient thoroughly, that you never know, and always you have this idea, what would happen if I could done properly the diagnosis. So this is just to think about. We have the tools, we have the methodology, so we have to do the things well, because those cells were detected very soon. but we weren't able because we were just not looking at the globality. In conclusion, what I want to say is that screening tube is probably the best option to have a good orientation and approach into the diagnosis and prognosis, because it helps us for doing the best choice that we can do according to the global situation, according to semiology that we have. And also this provides a huge amount of data that should be well managed. So the utility, the use of automatic analysis can help us for doing methodologically much better the diagnosis or the approaching to all the cells that we have. So try to do, at least if you don't have this tool, because sometimes you have no access to these tools or they are not available to everybody, but at least the automatic analysis teach us that this is a source of knowledge that you have to analyze all the dots you have, because even in those dots you have some options that can provide you information related to the disease you are dealing with. Doing that, we can optimize the time, the money, and the resources. So, thank you very much for attending. Remember that even doing this, the flow cytometry is only one tool in the puzzle of the diagnosis. The diagnosis should be integrated, and what we see with the flow cytometry should be concordant to the DNA, to histology, semiology, because we are just working, all of us, in the same direction. So we never know what would happen with our patient, but at least if we work properly, we know that everything is very well done. Then at least we did everything we had in our hands to help clinicians, and the most important, to help the patients. And screening tubes are very, very powerful tools that should be done and should be used properly. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for being there, and don't hesitate to ask any question you want to ask according to this disclosure, or to this presentation, or according to your previous knowledge. I'm very glad to try to solve those questions, to answer these questions, and my pleasure to be here. And again, thank you very much, Cytognos, for giving me this opportunity for sharing all these thoughts and all this knowledge. Thank you very much.